Ladies and gentlemen, you're all very welcome tonight to this very important event. I'm really, really proud that we have this wonderful and important occasion and reading here tonight. I'm particularly pleased to welcome our Deputy President, Professor Aidan Mulkeen, Sister McCarron on my left here, and other distinguished guests, but obviously a particularly warm welcome to Noo Saro-Wiwa, who has joined us for this event, which marks the 20th anniversary of the execution of her father, Ken SaroWiwa, and his 8 colleagues, the Ogoni 9. We are very, very pleased to have so many people with different and varied connections to Ken SaroWiwa with us this evening. The library has a stated commitment to outreach and community engagement in its broadest form, in line with the university's strategic plan, and I welcome you all. The library has been planning tonight's reading, the Ken SaroWiwa Postgraduate Award, and the wonderful exhibition to mark this anniversary for quite some time. I want to thank the Deputy Librarian, Helen Fallon, for driving this initiative with energy and enthusiasm, and the library team who worked with her to bring this to fruition. I'm sure many of you know, in this regard, if not most, I'm just the front man, and in this particular occasion, Helen is the brains of the operation, and she deserves all the credit. I also want to record our thanks to our partners in this endeavour, the Maynooth University Writing Centre and the Department of English, who've made a contribution to this event tonight. So thank you very much, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Helen Fallon, Deputy Librarian.
Thank you very much, Cathal, for that introduction. I'm Helen Fallon, I'm the Deputy Librarian here, and I'm delighted to see so many people here tonight for this tremendous occasion. And we're very fortunate to have our Deputy President here tonight, Professor Aidan Mulkeen. And Professor Aidan Mulkeen has many connections with Africa, so it's very fitting that he's now going to say a few words about this evening. So I'll call him in now.
Thanks, everyone. If Cathal is the front man, I think I'm the warm-up act, so I won't keep you too long. But I do want to say a few things. It is a real pleasure for me to be here this evening to join this event in honour of Ken SaroWiwa. It's a real tribute to the man and to his impact that most Irish people know of him and know his work. You could go out on the street and mention the name and people would recognise it. You could go out on the street and ask people to name 2 of their European commissioners and they probably couldn't answer. So it just gives you a scale that somebody who is not from Ireland and didn't work here is better known and better remembered than some of the people in power over us. We know him as a very talented writer and TV producer, as a leader and as a man of principles. We know him as a man who saw social and environmental problems and campaigned peacefully and effectively to address them. He campaigned so effectively that in 1993 the oil companies had to withdraw from the Ogoni land. Sadly, he was also so successful that he was later arrested and executed on trumped-up charges because he was too disruptive to powerful forces. So he's a man who deserves to be remembered for what he achieved, for what he stood for, and for the inspirational words he left behind. I think Maynooth University is very happy to be the home for a collection of some of those words. So this time 4 years ago, in November 2011, we had the privilege of accepting a donation from Sister McCarron. Sister McCarron, who's here this evening, is a member of the Congregation of Our Lady of Apostles, and I'm delighted to welcome some members of her congregation here this evening, and also her brother Dermot and his wife Margaret. The donation, though, was very significant because it was the death row correspondence that she received from Ken SaroWiwa, smuggled out of military detention in bread baskets. It doesn't sound real, does it, that that was going on only 20 years ago. So it's a very special collection, a collection of inspiring words, poignant images, and it forms a very tangible reminder of the stark reality of the life and struggle of Ken SaroWiwa. So while we're here this evening to celebrate and to remember, I'd like to also encourage you to take some time to look at the exhibition, either this evening or over the next fortnight, or if you can't do that, sometime later online. I'm particularly pleased that this collection is hosted here. As a university, we host a lot of collections and archives, but this one seems very in tune with our institution. So we are a university with a strong tradition of interest in social justice and environmental issues. That's sometimes hidden in the daily reality of teaching students and marking scripts, and running research projects and balancing budgets. But actually, the staff and students of the university have always taken a very strong interest in social issues and environmental issues, and they have always been willing to give their time and their energy to support social and environmental causes. Now, I don't want to make any false claims here. I'm not suggesting that we're involved in anything as significant as the struggle in Ogoniland. But I do think that we're an institution with a genuine interest in social justice, and one which is in some small way ideologically compatible with the exhibition. The other thing that I'd like to say is I'd like to highlight the role of the library team in this work. So one of the areas where libraries make an enormous contribution is in the conservation of precious collections and making them available to the world. It is a little ironic because as we think of libraries in the digital age, we tend to think that you don't have to go to a library anymore. You can receive the information online. It's true, readers don't have to come here to see the material. But in a digital age, it still requires the dedication of archivists and conservators to preserve, index, catalogue, and present a collection in a meaningful way to the outside world. So I'd like to thank the library team here for the work that they've done, often unseen, in preserving this historic archive and making it available to researchers and to future researchers. So thank you for that. And finally, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome on behalf of the university to Noo Saro-Wiwa, the daughter of Ken, and the author of an award-winning book on Nigeria. Her book, Looking for Transwonderland Travels in Nigeria, was actually nominated for the Dahlman Best Travel Book Award and also the Sunday Times Travel Book of the Year Award in 2012. I've actually had the pleasure of reading parts of it. I can't say I read it all, I don't want to be caught out. But it's a contemporary look at Nigeria in a witty, insightful manner, and it's not so much a travel guide as a report of her travels in her home country. And you could see it as sort of a virtual tour of the most populous country in Africa and one of the least visited by tourists. So I'm delighted that she's able to be with us here this evening. I'd like to publicly welcome her to Maynooth University, and I look forward to hearing her reading. So finally, you're all very welcome. I'm very glad you could make it, and I hope you enjoy the evening. Thank you very much.
4 years ago, Maynooth student John O'Shea brought Sister Magella McCarron's letters from Ken SaroWiwa to our attention, and shortly afterwards we received the archive into the library. The preservation, cataloguing and, where appropriate, restoration of this historic collection to its original form is of prime importance not just to the university but also to the international community of researchers and activists. Our library archivists and conservators have done an admirable job in this regard, a fact we can be justifiably proud of. From my earliest conversations with Sister Magella, it was evident that it was very important to her that the material in the archive, and particularly the letters, be available to as wide an audience as possible. Indeed, in a letter dated the 21st of March 1995, Ken SaroWiwa writes about reading in the Irish Times, about Sister Magella's campaign work to save the lives of the Ogoni Nine. And he writes, "I think you yourself might be surprised how far those Ogoni bells are ringing now, and how you have become the bellman." So the library was tasked by Sister Magella with ringing those Ogoni bells, and we have done that through a number of endeavours. To complement the printed archive, the library, with Dr. Anne O'Brien from Kairos Communications, developed the Ken SaroWiwa audio archive, a set of recordings of people connected to Ken SaroWiwa and the issues in the letters. Just this afternoon, Noo Saro-Wiwa was recorded for the archive, and that recording will be available later in the week. And the archive, the audio archive, is available on the web, free of charge, 24/7 from anywhere in the world, and it has been accessed over 1,300 times to date. And the University of Ibadan, where Ken SaroWiwa was a student, has broadcast sections of it, as has Irish National Radio. Letters from the collection were also amongst the foundation content of the Digital Repository of Ireland. That's a PRTLI initiative that created a digital repository of significant arts and social sciences content hosted here in Ireland, but accessible around the world. The archive has been integrated into a module on development theories on the adult education BA in community studies, and has been the subject of conference papers and posters and journal, magazine and newspaper articles. The letters have been published in a book, Silence Would Be Treason, Last Writings of Ken SaroWiwa, edited by Dr. Ida Corley, a lecturer here in Postcolonial Studies in the English department, myself and Dr. Lawrence Cox from our Sociology department. We are grateful to Trócaire, who helped fund the publication of the book, and are very pleased they have joined us tonight, as they played a key role both in the relief effort following the destruction of villages in Ogoni land and in the campaign to save the lives of the Ogoni Nine. They are very much part of the Ogoni story. Direct sales of Silence Would Be Treason from the library desk and the Maynooth University bookshop means we have funding to launch a postgraduate award in Ken SaroWiwa's name. The winner of the inaugural award is Graham Kay, who receives €2,000 towards his doctoral research, which we'll hear more about shortly, and an engraved crystal bowl. I will now call on Noo Saro-Wiwa to present the award.
I'm so pleased that Maynooth University is honouring my father in this way. I spoke to Graham earlier today about his research project, and it sounds genuinely interesting. You know, the whole idea about oil, the history of oil, and the reasons why governments pursue the policies that they do, particularly foreign policies, is so important. And I think, a lot of us don't really know much about it, and I certainly don't know much about the early history of oil and how much that's underpinned so much of what's happened in the world, whether it's wars or foreign policy. So I'm really glad that Graham is doing this PhD, and I'm really glad that Maynooth has launched this award. I'm hoping that for years to come it will continue to highlight the sort of issues that my father died for, and hopefully lead to a better understanding of these things. So. Very nice award. Congratulations.
I'll keep it short. Thank you everyone for coming this evening. It is wonderful to see so many familiar faces. It is a privilege to be accepting this award. I would like to thank Maynooth University, the library, and the editors of Silence Would Be Treason for creating this honour, and in doing so celebrating the life and work of Ken SaroWiwa. I would also like to thank Noo and the SaroWiwa family for their continued partnership with Maynooth. A special thanks to Helen, Fallon, and the wonderful staff of the library who created, administered and organised this award. And finally, I would like to express my gratitude to my colleagues and friends in the History Department for their assistance and support, in particular my PhD supervisor, Professor de Menezes. Using this award, I hope to expand our knowledge of the relationship between governments and the oil industry in the early 20th century. It will help fund a crucial research trip to complete archival research in Germany, which is integral to questions being investigated as part of my PhD thesis. Over the past 100 years, oil has weaved itself into the very fabric that maintains our society as we know it. From fertilizers to plastics and credit cards to cigarette filters, oil has placed the world's economy in a difficult position of almost complete reliance. And with that dependence, the importance of control emerges. My project will attempt to confront the relationship between government and corporation with respect to a crucial resource underpinning our world today. By looking at the genesis of this relationship, it will help us to understand how a trickle of influence grew to an overwhelming force in the formation of policy. This force would eventually lead to the creation of major corporations with unparalleled financial backing to acquire the necessary agreements for further exploitation. Ken SaroWiwa's life's work highlights this threat to not only the environment, but also to how money, power, and natural resources can arbitrarily influence a people or way of life. It is essential to examine where this record began, so we might further recognise the significance of Ken's achievements. Indeed, his life and death underscores the need for us as an academic community to continue to understand and probe the societal impact of the oil industry. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Graham. I would now like to call on Sister Magellan McCarron, who will speak briefly.
Good evening, everybody. And if you don't know me, my name is on a big poster downstairs in the exhibition. And I think the first photograph was when I was about 8 years old. So that's... Now, when Noo was talking, I hadn't planned this, but she has a beautiful little passage in her book, which I read in honour of her father. My father never bought into the Nigerian system of corruption. I was blind to the virtue behind our modest home and few holidays, and I resented his frugality and non-materialism. I craved a luxurious lifestyle, but he held an intense disdain for such things. I think it's a beautiful passage and very, very extraordinary, actually. So thank you to his memory. And Noo, I thank you for your book. As somebody who was in Nigeria for many years, it has an endearing quality in many parts and most enjoyable to read. But there was much more in it for me. I call it political bravery, where political for this evening's little talk equates to power. Your bravery in writing the book exposes the pain of the child before the power of the parent, the anger of the citizen before the state, the frustration of the diasporian before the nation. So thank you. In the past 20 years, there has been much political bravery in Ogoni and elsewhere, and I salute the political bravery of campaigners, protesters, advocates, supporters. The resolution of oil and gas pollution is so simple. Turn off the tap, stop the flow, mend the leak, clean the stain, allow the earth to flourish and feed. For me, that's all. So please, everybody in this room, one way or another, has been part of this story, and I have never felt alone since I arrived home in 1994, leaving the Ogoni people in prison behind me. But there's two people that I would like to mention today, and in them, everybody is remembered. They have left us now. Trocra's Niall Tobin, brother of Colum, was the first phone caller to me in Lagos in '94 to offer humanitarian aid to the conflict situation in Ogoni. He has died within that 20 years. Irish Times' Sean McConnell was the first of many journalists who accommodated the Ogoni story in the Irish media. He too has left us. May they both rest in peace. Maynooth University Library has been the Ogoni voice on November the 10th for the past 4 years. Its staff, from Librarian Cal Macaulay and Deputy Helen family, with their very helpful and professional staff, have far extended the voice of SaroWiwa far further than we could have dreamed. And the interesting thing is, it hasn't stopped. It seems to be going even further. Thank you. And I am so delighted to meet Graham Kay. I met him for the first time this afternoon. And it was a delight to find somebody that I could talk to about oil and its issue over the last 20 years. And even though he seems to be only beginning his study, he is already almost an expert. So Ken, I wish you the very best, because a PhD is not a joke to be undertaken. I would like to honour tonight John O'Shea. He's here, and I think everybody should know John O'Shea. John, stand up, because you were the person who began the link between Maynooth Library and myself. He won't stand up. Okay, he's from Tipperary, and I met him in a field over in the Shell to Sea campaign and the Rossport Solidarity Camp. So he was both an academic and a campaigner. And he obeyed me to the hilt. He came back, and I think the staff were all on holidays. It was July in the Department of Sociology where he was studying. But he had the initiative to come down to the library and look for Helen, and then the rest is history. So thank you, John, and I'm absolutely delighted you're here tonight. So each anniversary, I kind of describe it is that I walk a little farther, think a little deeper, looking for some kind of a reflection or a message for the anniversary of this year. And this year, it was a visit to Glasnevin Cemetery. And because I was in Nigeria for most of my adult life, my knowledge of Irish history was very poor. And I was very fortunate to stumble on a lecture on Parnell. It was the Ivy Day celebration. I didn't know anything about the Ivy Day, but I found a group of sincere people wearing an ivy leaf in memory of Parnell, who had died 128 years before. So 20 years looks very little and shows how long history can celebrate somebody. He ended his talk with a beautiful poem from Yeats, whom I know very little about too, but I found it was my message for the time of this anniversary, because it leaves us with a challenge. The leaders, the charismatic people, light up the world for us for a while, enables us to see what is wrong, and then the challenge is ours to follow where they left off. So I want to read To a Shade, where Yeats invites Parnell to come out of his grave, come back and look around Dublin, and in the end tells him to go back and sleep in peace. If you have revisited the town, thin shade, whether to look upon your monument, I wonder if the builder has been paid, or happier thought it when the day is spent to drink of that salt breath out of the sea, when grey gulls flit about instead of men, and the gaunt houses put on majesty. Let these content you and be gone again, for they are at their old tricks yet. A man of your passionate serving kind, who had brought in his full hands what they had only known, had given their children's children loftier thought, sweeter emotion working in their veins, like gentle blood has been driven from the place, and insult heaped upon him for his pains. For his open-handedness, disgrace, your enemy, an old foul mouth, had set the pack upon him. And I love the last piece. Go, unquiet wanderer, and gather the Glasnevin coverlet about your head till the dust stops your ear. The time for you to taste of that salt breath and listen at the corners has not come. You had enough of sorrow before death. Away, away, you are safer in the tomb. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Magella. We'll now proceed to the next part of the evening, which is the reading by Noo Saro-Wiwa. So some information about Noo, who is a really distinguished travel writer. She was born in Nigeria but raised in the UK, and she took a trip around the country of her birth in 2008. The journey resulted in her first published book, Looking for Transwonderland, Travels in Nigeria. It was published by Granta in 2012 and selected as BBC Radio 4's Book of the Week, named the Sunday Times Travel Book of the Year, and was shortlisted for the Authors Club Dolman Travel Book of the Year award. The Financial Times nominated it as one of the best travel books of 2012, and in the same year, it was included among The Guardian's 10 best contemporary books on Africa. So Noo will read for approximately 15 minutes and then she will take questions. And the book is on sale here, and John from the bookshop is here with copies, and Noo is very happy to sign copies. So I'll call on Noo Saro-Wiwa.
I think the first excerpt I'll read is sort of towards near the beginning of the book, where I'm just talking about my feelings about going back to Nigeria as a child. So, as a teenager, I virtually had to be escorted by the ankles onto a Nigeria Airways flight at the start of the summer holidays, not only because I wanted to avoid all that airport angst, but also because I didn't want to reach the ultimate destination. Having to spend those 2 months in my unglamorous, God-forsaken motherland with its penchant for noise and disorder felt like punishment. I wanted a real holiday, riding banana boats in Barbados or eating pizzas by the Spanish Steps, just like my school friends. But my parents didn't have the money or the inclination for that sort of thing. We're going home, they insisted, with the firmness of people who knew better than to waste exotic travel on the very young on a regular basis. So come July almost every year, I would pack my bags and prepare to serve my annual sentence in a country where the only development I witnessed was the advance of new wall cracks and cobwebs, and where growth simply meant larger damp stains on the ceiling. Nothing ever seemed to change for the better politically or economically in 1980s Nigeria. I would arrive at an airport that hadn't been refurbished in 20 years. The humid viscous air, pointlessly stirred by sleepy ceiling fans, would smother me like a pillow and gave a foretaste of the decrepitude and discomfort that lay ahead. Back then, when international flying was considered the height of sophistication, many of the child passengers were dressed as if attending a black tie event. Parents tarted up their little girls in frilly party dresses. The boys sweated it out in bow ties and dinner jackets, while armed thieves, otherwise known as government soldiers, rummaged through everyone's luggage at customs. Only in Nigeria could you see machine guns, tuxedos, army fatigues, and evening frocks together at an airport. The insane aesthetic summarised my country's vanities and bathos more clearly than anything else, and it depressed me. I wanted out. I wanted to go back to the place I called home, leafy Surrey, a bountiful paradise of Twix bars and TV cartoons and Leylandii trees, far removed from the heat and chaos of Nigeria. I was a toddler when the family moved here in 1978. It was during the oil boom, when the Nigerian currency, the naira, enjoyed close parity with the British pound, and a middle-class Nigerian life could easily be transferred to England. With plans to give us English schooling, my father settled the family in the UK while he continued to work in Nigeria as a property developer, writer, and businessman. For months at a time, our family was headed by our homesick mother. She cooked plantain and grappled with central heating and the other novelties of English life. We watched Sesame Street and scribbled naughtily on the walls when not scanning the fridge for snacks. But the luxuries of English life were not what my father had brought his children to England for. We were here to get an education and he was terrified that we'd all gone soft, which is why our summer returns to Nigeria often sometimes included a brutal acculturation fortnight in our village. The experience was a character-building one, in which we were forced to live without electricity, running water, and, the most egregious of deprivations, television. It was a tropical gulag. Nameless aunts and uncles would claw lovingly at our faces and mock us for not speaking our native language fluently. Obegroa, they would deliberately ask us, cackling at our non-response. For dinner, they fed us intensely savoury dishes such as ground rice and okra soup, eaten by the light of a kerosene lamp and washed down with body temperature Coca-Cola. Then at bedtime, we provided the meals for an invisible but frighteningly audible army of mosquitoes and sandflies. By dawn, our arms were covered in itchy lumps that looked like strawberries, only bigger, and our fingernails had turned black from the nocturnal scratching of sweaty flesh. Having a cooling shower was the only incentive to get up and face the new day, but even achieving that was a chore in itself. You had to fetch the water first. We didn't have to trek all the way to the river, but the jerry can still needed to be dragged from my grandmother's house 20 metres away from ours, which wasn't easy when the water weighed more than we did. Concerned that all this suffering wasn't sufficiently authentic, my father later instructed my grandmother to take us everywhere she went. We were to shadow her every move to get a true taste of village life. But she interpreted this diktat more literally than my father intended and tried waking us up for pre-dawn prayers. Faking sleep, my siblings and I cowered against the hot, sticky bedsheet as her lamplit silhouette banged against the window and called out our names. Zina, no, Tedum, Ake, wake up. I'd never suffered such cold sweats in such a hot place. By contrast, my parents believed that without their country, they were nothing. My mother habitually referred to our Surrey residence as the house. Nigeria was home, the place where her parents and siblings lived, where her wilted energies blossomed and her pale skin toasted to its original brown. At home, she sparkled in Nigerian traditional clothing rather than battling the British winter in woolens and thick overcoats. At home, she was no longer the alienated housewife, but the madame, handing over laundry and shopping lists to the servant while she caught up with old friends. My father's patriotism was even more fervent. He carpeted our hallway in green to match the colour of the national flag, and once interrupted a crucial TV episode of Little House on the Prairie to teach me verses of the national anthem. It was a pointed stand against our Americanisation, and even our passports remained resolutely Nigerian, as a snub to gold-dusted British citizenship. One year, when I was 12, my father tried to instill a love of his country in his children by taking us on a road trip to see the beautiful side of Nigeria. From our hometown of Port Harcourt in the south, we travelled north into the interior. My sister, younger brother, and I sat in the back of our Peugeot 504, or Peugeot 504, as we say, while our father puffed on his pipe in the front passenger seat and hummed to Richard Clayderman, a deeply uncool classical pianist who performed covers of 1970s pop songs. Our driver, Sonny, who hated those tinkling Bee Gees and Barbra Streisand covers, drove in agonised silence through the Central Highlands. Throughout the trip, we were repeatedly reminded of how lucky we were to travel in this way. Very few Nigerians have seen as much of the country as you, my father would say, as we went to the Yankari Game Reserve or to the new capital city Abuja and to Jos and to Kano. But I was too young to grasp this privilege. Fun as the trip was in part, I still wasn't sold on the country. Had someone told me then that the holiday of 1990 was to be our last in Nigeria, I would have performed cartwheels down the street. Little did I know that the reason for our future absence would be so grim. Do I have time for two more or one more?
Two more, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is just a portion about religion in Nigeria. So if there's a country more religious than Nigeria, then I haven't been there. According to the Bible, God made the earth in 6 days and took a rest on the seventh. But by creating Nigerians, he ensured that that was the last day off he's ever had since. 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, we call upon his services, connecting with him, singing his praises, establishing dialogue with him, an extremely loud dialogue at that. In my time in Lagos, I had heard hairdressers singing their hallelujahs at salons or evangelical radio stations resounding in internet cafes. and bus passengers collectively breaking out into ovine choruses of "Jesus is my father, he never, never fails me." Television brought little respite. Whenever the electricity miraculously flowed in Auntie Janice's house, I would flop onto the sofa to savour a football match or a music show, only to be lulled out of my square-eyed stupor by a pastor barking down a microphone at the start of the Divine Connection Hour and other such broadcasts. Nighttime was no haven either. One morning, as daylight diluted the inky sky and the humidity had receded enough to allow me to finally sleep, I was woken by a man walking down the street outside, preaching the gospel at the top of his voice. Temptations of the flesh and the evils of promiscuity were his main themes. "You no want for sexing, you no want for sexing," he bellowed into the cool dawn. I couldn't hear the rest of his sermon because he was sauntering down the street, allowing residents of each house to catch only portions of what he said. Had he been serious about spreading the good news, he might have chosen to stay in one place and let everyone in the vicinity hear his message in full. But he wasn't concerned about this. The act of imparting the message was his main motive, a conspicuous show of piety that bordered on the self-indulgent. All of this was evidence that God's love is spreading, Christians would say. My view of the situation was perhaps less nourishing. Years of economic struggle and political corruption seemed to have focused Nigerians' attention on God more strongly than ever before. I noticed these changes in some members of my extended family. Religion anaesthetizes the pain of bad transport and low wages and stuffed ballot boxes and candlelit nights. In the decades since democracy was restored in 1999, people's anger seemed to have faded into a muted resignation that shied away from staging street protests. Instead, they developed strategies to earn more money, selling items on the side or begging relatives and friends for loans and donations. But above all, they pray for salvations from life tribulations. Half of Nigeria's population, concentrated in the north, is Muslim, but among the other half, evangelical Christianity, especially the Pentecostal kind, is thriving, but not the kind of religion that's materialistic, that's spiritual. It's the materialistic kind that's the problem. So this charismatic, fundamentalist form of Christianity originated in the 1920s. Focusing on a direct relationship with God, its adherents affirmed their faith through the baptism of the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues, a strange babble understood only by God. Their interpretation of the Bible is a more literal one, with a strong emphasis on abstaining from alcohol, gambling, extramarital sex, and other vices. Charismatic Pentecostalism began to flourish in the 1980s as Nigeria tumbled into an economic abyss. On IMF orders, General Babangida had introduced a harsh economic structural adjustment policy aimed at cutting government spending and opening Nigeria's markets to imports. It ended the decadence of the oil boom years and brought on a nightmare of high unemployment and even deeper poverty for the ordinary man. Out of this emerged an educated elite with a strong, highly conservative message. These Pentecostal Christians believed that being born again, i.e. living a life of spiritual purity free from sin, one could be saved from going to hell and enjoy a healthy and successful life on earth. Pentecostals set up new churches that branched away from the colonial Catholic and Anglican churches. The preachers were entrepreneurially savvy and well qualified, often former lawyers, professors, and doctors. Inspired by American televangelists, they ran their churches like businesses. Worshippers were promised that by becoming born again and making generous donations to the church, they would be blessed with health, wealth, and good luck. Pentecostal ministers are seen as prophetic figures, responsible for passing on God's words to followers. They're self-styled faith healers, problem solvers, doctors, and philosophers and economists all rolled into one. They offer the gospel as a cure-all for every ill, their services focusing on divine healing, exorcisms, and the performance of miracles. Call it what you will, prosperity Christianity, health and wealth gospel, Nigerians are highly receptive to its message. Around 20 million people now belong to a Pentecostal church, pouring money into its bulging coffers and turning some churches into highly lucrative concerns. The ministries, some of which specialize in certain types of healing, such as finances or fertility, are run like commercial enterprises. They manufacture books, CDs, DVDs, and merchandise stamped with their own logos. These churches have proliferated like mice. A handful of large ones enjoy million-strong congregations, but the other 1,000 or so ministries are generally tiny, established by anyone who wills it. For every legitimate ministry, several are run by charlatans seeking enrichment of the non-spiritual variety. Competition for adherents is fierce, yet their wealth isn't frowned upon. My sister once came across an article in the Nigerian society magazine Ovation, titled The Jet Set Pastor, in which a wealthy church leader posed for photographers in the plush interiors of his mansion. His wealth may very well have been legitimate, but such affluence often evades suspicion because, much like in the gold-encrusted churches of 16th century Europe and South America, in the Pentecostal mind, wealth and virtue are intertwined. Pentecostal pastors are nearly always the founders of their church and the focus of attention. Thousands of worshippers gather in stadiums or convention centres to listen to their sermons. The preachers prowl and strut around the stage like R&B stars, using their charisma to spread the gospel and rouse the congregation into a frenzied spiritual orgy. The miracles they perform are something to behold. The blind can suddenly see. Sex freaks discover monogamy. Paraplegics stagger out of their wheelchairs for the first time since their car accident. In Lagos, not a week goes by without one of these evangelical events taking place somewhere. They're promoted like rock concerts and given lavishly worded pseudo-intellectual titles such as the expository and systematic revelation of victory over worry and anxiety. On the streets are countless billboards featuring these star preachers looking extremely dapper in their silk ties and boxy Italian suits with handkerchiefs poking neatly from their breast pockets. Their shiny faces stare down at me with toothy, camera-ready smiles that might twinkle if I stared at them long enough. Such stylishness seemed rather disquieting. After all, Jesus, the Prophet Muhammad, or Nelson Mandela, or Mahatma Gandhi, Aung San Suu Kyi aren't renowned for their snappy dress sense. The preacher's presentation is unmistakably American in influence, though some intellectuals argue that their message of prosperity is rooted in traditional African animist religion, which has always sought material gain from the gods. Either way, many Nigerians see Christians as a fail-safe conduit to financial prosperity. Yeah, I'll just stop there. Hang on to. And then the final section is when I go back to the village, my village banner in Ogoniland. And this is, I'm just reminiscing about the time that when we buried my father. We got his remains about 10 years after he died, finally. And so we'd had his sort of mock burial in 2000, where we buried an empty coffin. And then when we got his remains, we went back to Nigeria in 2005, and then had the real burial. Okay, so I'm with my driver, Sonny. He was my father's driver as well. So deeper into the village, the tarmac stopped and the road became sandy. The heat bludgeoned me as I climbed out of the car outside my father's white bungalow. It stood close to the unpainted, windowless church on the edge of his parents' compound. My grandfather's two-storey house towered above the surrounding bungalows belonging to some of his 6 wives, including my grandmother. All of them are dead now. Their graves filled up the compound, converting it into a graveyard of sorts. That's the tradition. We bury our dead next to their homes. My father, however, is buried in a public field in the village as a tribute to his struggle. His body had been dumped unceremoniously in a unmarked grave after he and his 8 colleagues were murdered by Sani Abacha's regime. It had taken some years to retrieve the remains. We had to wait for democratic elections and then ask the government to locate the grave, and then finally the bones were identified through forensic tests. In 2005, my brother Junior and my sister Zina and my half-sister Sinto and my uncle Owens and we prepared the remains for burial. As Junior brought out the large bag containing our father's dissembled skeleton, Zinna cried out loud on the far edge of the room. Sinto watched silently through her tears. I decided that the situation was only as macabre as my mind would allow, so I forced myself to lift out a long bone wrapped in newspaper. Uncle Owens, who's a medical doctor, helped us to identify and arrange each femur and fibula and metacarpal and rib, settling our minds into a more industrious mood as we assembled the skeleton. Before long, everyone was helping out. It was hard to conceive that these coarse brown objects we held in our hands were our father, a once energetic man with dark, stocky flesh. In vain, I searched for his face in the skull now resting at one end of the coffin. The 2 front teeth were missing. How and why, I don't know, but when Junior placed a pipe between the upper and lower jaws, his teeth metamorphosed into that familiar smile. My father was always the one who made the decisions in the family, but now we were taking charge of him, deciding the fate of his remains. When I think of the day he showed me the architectural drawings of the bungalow we were in 20 years previously, I doubt he ever imagined we would be using one of the rooms as a temporary morgue. It now made the house uninhabitable in my view, and I certainly wasn't going to spend the night there by myself. So my grandparents' compound was outside. My grandparents' compound was silent and empty, except for the odd goat and sporadic children's game. I was used to visiting Banner with one or both of my parents in the days when the machinery of hospitality seemed to grind into action of its own accord. But now that I was on my own and my grandparents were all dead, there's no one to greet me or feed me. And as I pottered around, examining all the graves, I recalled my cousin Kitiwe once telling me that she felt little reason to visit Banner now that our parents were gone.